And that kind of ties into this will also, doing that power mapping will also help you find your space. Often it can be really hard for Greens to find a space to operate and expand within the political ecosystem. We face open repression, in states like Illinois. The shocking number that I always use is if you want to run for U.S. House as a Republican or a Democrat, you have to collect between 700 and 800 signatures. If you want to run as a Green, you've got to collect more than 15,000 in 90 days from within a single congressional district, and you've got to double it. So for me to run for Congress, I have to collect 30,000 signatures in 90 days from within a largely rural congressional district. That's a level of lift that's almost impossible, right? Unless you have a strong organization. That's the only way you're getting something like that done. And that repression can make it really hard for us to find our space, right? Because we're literally being beaten with a stick as we try to build. And the people that do have power are literally using their power to stop us from growing. Another problem we often have is in larger cities with established leftist organizations, even if they're small today, right? Greens often have a hard time getting a foothold. Historically, Greens have been more of kind of social democratic, right? New Deal Democrat, New Deal type policies. And it wasn't until 2016 that the Green Party of the United States became officially eco-socialist. Now, there's been socialist Greens since day one, right? It's been one of the primary movements, primary demographics within the party. But historically, we didn't have a strong socialist identity. So that means when you go into a place like Chicago or a place like Seattle, right, you've got the left flank of the Democratic Party. And then in Seattle, you've got Socialist Alternative and Gustavus Want, right? That's a very tiny, tiny hole that Greens, if they're just another, social democratic org, to try to thread, right? Because oftentimes, in big cities, you'll find your moderate Greens will find themselves to the right of the, DSA types of the left flank of DSA, right? And then sandwiched in between something like Answer in Chicago, which historically, has come out of the Socialist Party and has had huge success in anti-war protests in Chicago. Right now they're not. Now they're very small, but in the history, that history still lingers. So it's really hard for Greens. It's been really hard in the past for Greens in Chicago to get a foothold if they weren't, having an explicit politics. The landscape, as we said earlier, is also filled with not-for-profit issue-oriented groups. Usually they're officially nonpartisan, but these organizations suck a lot of energy and money out of the air. They redirect people on issues into the Democratic Party, whether officially or not, right? Sunrise, Sierra Club, these are all nonpartisan organizations, but they are very much partisan organizations when you look at their endorsements and their activities. So to overcome these barriers to building a green socialist movement, it's really important that we're thinking about who our prospective base is and formulating strategies to help us orient our work, right? We don't have the money and the resources and the access to just go out there and, the Democratic Party will just throw money at something until they get us foothold, right? We don't have that money. If Sunrise wants to come into your community, although I think Sunrise is in a little financial trouble right now, but if post 2020 Sunrise wanted to come into your community, they could literally pay for organizers to move into your town and just create a foothold themselves. And as Greens and independent socialists, we don't have that. So we need to be efficient and strategic in our work, right? So we've got to think about, who do we know? Where is there an opening, right? If you're really into, ranked choice voting, that's great. But if there's already multiple organizations working on it, it's going to be really hard for you to, differentiate yourself and grow. Whereas if you find an issue where no one's talking about it, that's an opportunity, right, that we can jump into. Garrett?
Yeah, I agree there with like I said in the previous slides, I think that a lot of issues or a lot of organizations and nonprofits tend to get focused on particular issues, and then sometimes to the point where they don't feel like someone is being, let's say, radical enough, right? So you see these splinter groups where you might have more than one group that's focusing on a particular issue. So it's very hard to get attention starting up talking about an issue that's already being talked about by a bunch of other organizations. Instead, it might be better to support them in solidarity, but make your waves as a new Green Party local by tackling something that isn't being tackled. And what that is depends a lot on where you are, what's going on in your particular town or county or region. It varies a lot what the priorities are, but I can guarantee that everywhere has something that needs to be tackled because just of all of the systemic issues that we're facing under capitalism. We haven't defeated poverty yet. Fascism is rising. We haven't defeated fascism yet. We haven't gotten Medicare for all, right? We haven't gotten healthcare as a human right yet. We haven't done a Green New Deal yet. We haven't done serious climate change action yet. All of these things need to be done. And, there's probably at least one of those that you can have some sort of direct impact on in your local community that is currently not being talked about by anyone else. And, one way that we've grown our local Pittsburgh chapter is dealing with the fact that Southwest Pennsylvania is targeted by both Republicans and Democrats right now as kind of a new fossil fuel petrochemical hub. They want to build plastics factories here called a cracker plant, ethane cracker. They want to build petrochemicals here. They want to feed those petrochemicals with natural gas that they mine with fracking. So there's all kinds of plans for fracking and pipelines and plastics and all this stuff for this region, and it's a bipartisan issue. And so you see both of the major, the duopoly parties behind this, and even all of the nonprofits kind of lining up, where even the environmental nonprofits in this area are kind of like, well, they're going to do fracking, but we're going to try to limit the methane to be a little bit less than what it is right now. And so there's like no one who's taking a stand for all of the communities, which very often are, poor working class, and especially, Black and brown communities that are on the front lines of this stuff that are just getting bulldozed by these pipelines, and no one is speaking for them. So when the Green Party comes out and says, we care, we're speaking, we're confronting this issue, both as a social justice issue, an economic justice issue, a climate justice issue, that starts to get a lot of attention. That starts to change people's attitudes. And, the shift is slow, but I'm starting to see this shift here where a few years ago, all of the organizations were supporting Democrats, saying that they were climate champions while they were doing pipelines. And now you're starting to see these organizations come out with a little bit stronger words each time and asking a little bit more about, like, tell us more about what your climate policy is, because you're being kind of vague there. And so, you can see that momentum is starting to build. So, pick something like that no one is addressing, and use that to build your foothold. And, as you can do that, you can connect it to other struggles. Like I said, we're connecting pipelines to, economic justice with the working class, with racial justice, environmental justice. All of these issues are together. And, that's, again, what a political party is for, that we unite these issues into a political platform in solidarity where we can support each other and make it happen.
Yeah, and I'd say I'm seeing similar kind of shifts out of, as Garrett is, where the collaborationist tactics with corporate Democrats that, progressive interest groups and issue organizations and not-for-profits have been taking has seen them stabbed in the back time and time and time again. Right? They go and they say, well, we're at the table, so we have some power. And then they see themselves pushed out of the table, and nothing on the paper at the end represents what they wanted. Right? When we had our big fracking fight in Illinois years ago, it was our the governor was a Democrat, and there were super majorities in both the House and the Senate for the Democrats. Right? So the Democrats went behind closed doors with the industry joined by the Sierra Club, joined by the Illinois Environmental Council. And while they were back there making a deal to legalize fracking in Illinois, Greens and other environmentalists were getting arrested sitting in outside the governor's office where they were, right? They were hiding behind those closed doors, and they came out and they make a big deal about Illinois has the most restrictive fracking law in the country. Well, what they didn't tell you is that they didn't address the number of inspectors that we have. At the time, Illinois had 7 oil well inspectors for the entire state. 7. And thousands of wells. We couldn't inspect the wells we had, let alone actually, enforce new regulations on fracking. And in the end, fracking didn't happen in Illinois. It just hasn't been economical, right? But those not-for-profits were 100%, stabbing us in the back for their little bit of power. So I've seen that shift too, and it creates an opening for us, right? It creates an opening for us to offer that different path, whereas they're just pulling people in.